or the participant, heterogeneity of the items and of the group members, and the length of time between test and retest. Now, what are some administrator factors? Either receiving poor or unclear instructions or giving poor or unclear instructions during administration, or the administrator inaccurately scoring. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the examiner issues section of this lecture series. All of these things can affect reliability. So, for example, right here we have our example. Say you were told that your scores on being social were determined your promotion. The result is more likely that you would think, okay, what do they want me to be, instead of what is my behavior at the moment. It is the same thing on an aptitude or a psychoeducational test. For example, if we tell the student, okay, I have these problems, you see these 6 problems right here, I want you to complete these problems to the best of your ability. They're like, okay. What if they come up on a brick wall and they don't know how to correctly solve those problems? Well, how do I get myself out of this the other times? Well, I can act cute. I know how to do that. So they start thinking about what can my behavior what can it be like in order to get me out of this situation, when that's not the actual behavior that you wanted at all, but it's what has worked for them in the past. So then you have to give them better instructions. Okay, now I want you to go back and look at this question, complete the answer, complete this addition problem, and don't worry about mistakes. I just want you to go as far through the question, through the problem as you can. Now that's a little bit more clear, because then they're going, oh, it doesn't matter whether I get part of it wrong, I'm going to get points for at least getting part of it right. And so make sure that students understand what it is that you're asking them to do. And additionally, remember to follow the test administration. If you can't go back and do that, if the test booklet says, you know, you give the instructions once, you can repeat it once, that's all you get to do. You have to follow the test administration. So we have a number of items on the instrument. So the more items that you have, really is the greater the chance for reliability. So when you think about a math fluency test, is it better to have 20 questions than just 4? 4, you're not going to get as much information. You may have questions that actually mirror one another in those 4 questions. Or you may want to see, okay, I have 2 questions that are exactly alike, except there's just different numbers. The operations are the same. But I want to have one in the beginning of the test and one at the end of the test, because I don't want them right next to one another. I want to see if they remember the operation that they're supposed to follow. And so it might be better to have more questions on that type of a test than fewer questions. So if you don't have a longer test, if you don't have that opportunity, you might want to accumulate scores from shorter tests, and you can do this, you know, just in regular classroom practice. Stress is a big issue. Now, stress can come in a lot of different forms. For example, if you took an instrument or took a test in August when you had a terrible flu. Now, think back to your trying to remember the name of the test, the teacher test. Oh, better example. Let's think about Okay, stress. Let's think about taking an instrument. An instrument is a test. So let's think about the ACT. If you were taking the ACT 2 weeks apart from one another, not that anybody could afford that, but let's just hypothetically think about this. And you had the flu, you took it in August, okay? And we're talking about test, retest here. We're talking about August and December, so we'll go with that because they're not gonna let you take it 2 weeks apart from one another. So you take it in August. You have the flu. You felt terrible, but you were like, I paid for this test. I'm gonna go take it. And your scores were just not that acceptable. You were just like, I could have done so much better if I hadn't been sick. Well, in December, you're feeling a lot better. You decide, okay, I'm going to take it over in December. So you make sure that, you take your vitamins. You make sure, 2 weeks before the test, you go into the doctor. You have a little bit of a checkup. Make sure you don't have any infections on the way because you have to be feeling good for this test. And you know that that's why you didn't do well on that test in August. You're feeling a lot better. We're probably going to see a difference in your response consistency. Your answers are probably going to be a lot closer to the norm in the normative data, and they're going to rise. So if you're under a lot of stress, whether it's physical, being sick, you've just lost your best friend, or you've had a death in the family, your child is sick. You're not the one that's sick, but your child is, which makes it an emotional stressor. Or it could be mental. You could just be mentally exhausted from work. Any of these kinds of stress are going to interrupt response consistency. And you're very likely to give different responses than if you were not under that sort of stress in the first place. Now, heterogeneity of the items. So we found that the greater the differences in the kinds of questions or the difficulty of the question, so you have maybe 3 levels of difficulty on a question. So first of all, you would have maybe 1-digit addition, then you would have 2-digit addition, and then 3-digit addition, just to see how far that student had progressed. Then we're talking about having a greater chance of higher reliability between the coefficients. And a coefficient, again, are item-to-item correlations. Then you want to look at the heterogeneity of the group members. So the greater the heterogeneity in the preferences, skills, or behaviors being tested, the greater is the chance for a higher reliability in your correlation coefficient. So you want to have a wide group of people from all different walks of life taking this test. Then what about the length of time between test and retest? We've already talked about that a little bit. Okay, the shorter the time, the greater the chance for high reliability. However, we don't want it to be too short because then we have test effect. And we don't want it to be too long because then we have a time effect or experience. So as we have experiences, we tend to adjust our views. And then, so the time interval between the first time that we took a test and the second time is really what we call an experience interval. Now, this happens naturally, and it influences how we see things. So because internal consistency doesn't have a time lapse, we can expect it to have the highest, that coefficient that's where the biggest problem could occur. So we want to make sure that we don't participate in practice effect or experience effect. Usually 2 weeks is a good period of time if you're trying to see if a test is good for your class or not.